Thank you, Mr. President. 3 weeks ago, Typhoon Lando, or Kopu, battered Luzon provinces. It lingered over the country for a week, affecting more than 3 million Filipinos, causing damage to agriculture and infrastructure worth 11 billion pesos. With ongoing post-disaster efforts for Lando survivors, we received reports that huge amounts of disaster funds, particularly 81% of the Quick Response Funds, or the QRF, for 2015, remain unutilized, prompting your chairman of the Finance Committee to meet with agencies comprising the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council and urge them to spend disaster funds now for calamity survivals. The Department of Social Welfare and Development will utilize funds for Cash for Work programs, which usually involve clearing of debris and other rehabilitation work in affected areas. This is good, but we can expand this to other livelihood opportunities with the help of the Department of Labor and the Technical Education and Skills Development Authority. The government, particularly the Land Bank of the Philippines, should be more proactive in providing loan assistance to Lando victims, especially for farmers, because it is during the planting season. We don't want our farmers to be victims twice over, victims of natural calamity and man's greed in the form of loans from loan sharks. According to the State Weather Bureau, we are expecting 3 to 4 more typhoons before the end of the year, and this could be as strong as Lando. I hope our agencies can efficiently utilize the Quick Response Fund in the pre-positioning of basic needs and personnel in affected communities days before the typhoons arrive. There is no excuse not to be proactive because the funds are readily available in the form of the QRF and the NDREAM Fund, amounting to tens of billions of pesos, ready to be accessed by the agencies concerned. I repeat, we have to be proactive in addressing the needs of our communities, especially in reducing disaster risks and responding swiftly to post-disaster needs, as well as in adapting to and mitigating climate change. I say this, Mr. President, as we are now in the month of COP21. Towards the end of November, delegations from 196 member states of the United Nations will gather in France to negotiate for our future, and heads of state of these countries will commit or not to commit to climate action. People have asked me, what is COP21? It is the Conference of Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC, the UN treaty that aims to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that will prevent dangerous human interference with the climate system. This year is the 21st conference, thus it is called COP21. Parties to the UNFCCC have been negotiating for more than 2 decades. But what have we agreed on so far? Heads of state pronounce sweet promises, but the true battle is on the negotiating tables, where representatives of various government agencies agree or disagree over funding and technical support for vulnerable nations and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, among many issues. The developing countries blame the developed nations for causing global warming. Developing nations are the ones most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, while the developed countries have the responsibility and the capacity to provide assistance. COP has been, in the past years, a conference of all talk and no action. No action in the sense that the world has not done what it should have been doing the last decades to avert the climate crisis. We are now scrambling to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius. Why only now, when we could have started 20 years ago. Allow me to explain further the scenario now and other possible scenarios depending on our level of commitment and urgent climate action. The average global temperature has risen by 0.8 degrees Celsius since 1880. At this level, we are already experiencing, as we can see, unprecedented extreme weather events. And based on scientific studies, we need to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius to be able to survive, because 2 degrees Celsius is clearly destructive. COP21 aims to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees. The UNFCCC has received 154 intended nationally determined contributions, or what we call the INDCs. What are these? Simply put, Mr. President, these are country commitments for reducing greenhouse gas emissions after the year 2020. But these submissions are inadequate, as the combined commitments of all these countries, as computed now, would still lead to a 2.7 degrees Celsius global warming by the year 2030. We need to do more, and certainly we cannot go business as usual. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change predicts that with a 1.5 to 2.5 degrees Celsius rise in temperature in a span of 50 to 100 years, 30% of species would be at risk of extinction. According to the World Bank, it projects that even under a 2 degrees Celsius scenario, projections include a 20% decline in water availability for many regions and 15 to 20% decrease in crop yield. Moreover, with a warming of up to 2 degrees Celsius, sea level rise is projected to be around 70 centimeters. Sea level rise, floods that damage fish farms, increased acidification of the oceans by 2050 could reduce fish yield by 90%. If we reach 4 degrees Celsius warming, the IPCC further predicts, and I quote, severe and widespread impacts on unique and threatened systems, substantial species extinction, large risks to global and regional food security, the combination of high temperature and humidity compromising normal human activities. In fact, in a recent report in international media, it showed that Asia is already suffering from heat stress and heat wave because of increased warming of temperature. And this will clearly impact directly on productivity. These impacts can happen and is happening within our lifetime. We are talking about scenarios 15, 35, 85 years from now, all within this century. But we are already experiencing a near 1 degree Celsius rise. Our children, our grandchildren, their world will be very different from ours. Will we actually let them suffer, knowing now that we have the chance to avert a global crisis? We need urgent and aggressive climate action. Business as usual is not an option. Deep cuts in greenhouse gas emissions is a must. Nations with the capacity and resources to aid vulnerable countries must commit their support. The COP21 agreement should define with clarity how to operationalize financing for mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, technology transfer, and capacity building. The Philippines should achieve its INDC goal of 70% greenhouse gas emissions reduction. The government must commit to this and draw sectoral roadmaps that will lead us to this goal, most especially in the energy, transport, forestry, and agriculture sectors. As a developing nation, the Philippines needs more energy, but it cannot be, and I quote, "We need power at all costs, and we will develop at all costs." Some say that coal is cheap. I say coal is definitely not cheap. Coal affects our health. Coal kills biodiversity. Coal kills the environment. Coal affects our waters and pollutes the air we breathe. If we input all of these in the cost of coal, we can no longer say that coal is cheap. We are a country rich in renewable energy. The amount of sun and wind is more than enough to power our entire country many times over. We have a renewable energy law of 2008. And though we may not totally ban coal, we should have a good energy mix where there is a clear bias for renewables. This is the way Europe is going, and this is the way the world is going. I will repeat, we cannot go business as usual. It is not an option, at least if we want our children and grandchildren to live. COP21 is a crucial negotiation. But more important than the agreement is the actual action that will be taken by each nation. In closing, I wish to urge my colleagues, many of whom will be campaigning for re-election as senator, for re-election or election for higher office as president and vice president, or for local government positions. I urge you to join us to be climate advocates. Monitor the COP21 negotiations because this will affect the development agenda of the next administration. Climate change will make poverty alleviation and achieving food security increasingly difficult. New poverty traps will arise as extreme weather events becomes the new norm and economic growth will actually slow down. We need to take urgent climate action because humanity's future depends on what we do now and what we will fail to do. Let us not make failure an option. Let us make resilience and sustainability our future. Thank you, Mr. President.